Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from from anywhere you might be watching us from. My name is Bubba and I'm the moderator of this session by Action for Disaster Relief, first inaugural virtual conference for Africa. And then today I'm joined by a host of experts from different backgrounds. We have Madam Marilyn Mbogua, who works with DRR Africa. And then we also have Mr. Ahmed. Ahmed also works with Dr. Ahmed, rather. Dr. Ahmed. And then we also have other colleagues from the private sector from Nigeria, and as well as a host of other panelists. So I would like to welcome all of you to this session. And then, today we will be talking about, the panelists would be responding to your questions. And then, with the experience, we believe they would be able to give you a background of, their knowledge, but as well their expertise in the area of disaster risk reduction and response as well, especially within the Africa region. So keep your questions coming. Yeah, Marilyn. So just to move on, Marilyn, can you perhaps tell us about your viewpoints on these questions?
Thank you so much, Babuka. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So I think one of the questions that I had gotten was, how can national disaster management agencies ensure proper frameworks are in place instead of just focusing on mitigation? And I think, like, just to respond to that, one of the main things that at GNDR we have been advocating for through one of our flagship projects, VFL 2019, has that is that there needs to be we need to ensure that we involve the communities in all the decisions in the decision-making process, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who know what the risks are, and they're able to reduce their risks. So we have seen a lot of instances where a lot of communities don't feel that the local governments include them whenever they're assessing threats or they're preparing policies and plans and actions, and taking actions to reduce risk. And as a result of this, we have seen that exclusion exacerbates people's vulnerabilities because they're not aware of the valuable resource that can be accessed before, during, and after disasters. And if I could just give maybe like a short quotation from Article 7 of the Sendai Framework of the Disaster Risk Reduction, it states that government should engage with relevant stakeholders. And here we are talking about including women, children, the youth, persons with disabilities, poor people, migrants, indigenous people, volunteers, a community of practitioners, all the people in the design and implementation of policies, plans, and standards. But then we have also seen that in very many countries that this doesn't happen. A lot of times, the words written in policies are not matched by actions on the ground. So this is just one of the things that we have been saying, that we have to ensure that we use local knowledge, involve local communities in the disaster risk management, not only for improving risk mapping, but just also as a way of generating local ownership and creating awareness. The other thing that I would also say is that we need to ensure that there is proper participation of all the stakeholders. And one of the key things that we have seen as a gap is that time is very important. So a lot of the times when this planning happens, we find that the community participation has been quite poor, because a lot of the time when maybe like the local governments are coming to seek for opinions or views, like the crucial people are not there. So time and convenience is very crucial to community participation in resilience plans and actions, but then this is rarely considered. So we have to ensure that when we're doing our planning, whether we're the civil society, whether we're government, whether whoever we are, that we take in convenience is the number one reason why community members participate in resilience building. For example, that can we ensure that we take into action like mothers who have maybe like children who are breastfeeding, mothers who have to go and look for food, you know, like maybe the elderly who might not be able like to move from point A to point B, like just to ensure that their voices are heard. So these are just some of a few examples of what I would say. Maybe I'd like to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. Those are quite, you know, thought-provoking, you know, interventions, and I definitely agree with you that we really need to invest in the local communities, the local people's knowledge, because this is where actions are first taken. When disasters strike, the first responders are usually members of the community, and then we really have to empower them with the knowledge, with the skills to be able to, you know, respond effectively when they respond first. Thank you very much, Marilyn. So I'll go to Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed, could you tell us how you think, what do you think we can do better in terms of responding to disasters, but as well in our disaster risk reduction efforts?
Thank you, Babakar. And I think with respect to these proper frameworks on DRR, I think the most important thing is to, first of all, understand the global Sendai framework, which outlines 4 priorities, 7 targets, and all regional or national or any level, I think has to be aligned to that one, because I think that is a well-thought strategy, a framework rather, and all our national strategies or frameworks has to be aligned to those 4 priorities. Maybe frankly speaking, I think those 4 priorities are fundamentally covering all aspects of disaster risk management. That's number 1. Number 2 is also when you speak of proper frameworks, we have to talk about coherence, policy coherence. As we know, we have a lot of policies and frameworks globally. To start with, Sendai is one, the Paris Agreement is there, the SDGs are there, and so many others. So there needs to be a policy coherence when we speak of proper frameworks. What we are facing currently is all our frameworks are running, let me say, in silos, and at the end of the day, they create more confusion than you know, proper implementation of the whole thing. With that respect, I believe that alignment and coherence are quite important terminologies in that regard. Over to you, Babak.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. I definitely as well agree with you that in Africa, if we want to do better, we must be able to ensure that our frameworks are in tandem with our development objectives, because this is where we have the problems. And then, you know, usually you would see in the Africa region, most countries would propel their developments, but usually they do not put into consideration the vulnerabilities those developments are going to bring to the population. And then usually when the disaster strikes and it upsets the development efforts, it would usually become huge on the population, and it makes it a bigger burden that the population would find it very difficult to bear. So thank you very much. And then I'll move to Mr. Phillips. Mr. Phillips, from the private sector, can you please tell us what role do you think the private sector could play in this overall efforts to ensure that the Africa region in particular becomes less vulnerable to disasters? So, sorry, Mr.
Okay.
Philip, you are muted.
Yes,
okay.
yes, I'm on now. Now, I want you to know that most of the disasters that occur within the African continent occurs, if it is not a natural occurrence, it occurs within the private sectors, within the offices, within the buildings, and so on. So what happens is that if the private sectors, if they work on their disaster risk reduction, which is termed the business continuity plan, what happens is that they will have understood the risk that they carry in the building and outside the building. So they will have make sure their control measures work on those risks. That is one. Number two is that within the private sector, when you have organized response teams, so incidents, most incidents will not become a disaster. And if they become a disaster, because there's a form of preparedness, they will be able to make their direct call to the agencies that are supposed to respond to their issues. And within business continuity, what it means is that before an incident occurs, you should have a relationship with the agencies that you know will cater for the risk that you carry if it occurs. So by the time you have an incident that turns to be a disaster, what happens is you already know who to call. You already know what they expect of you to do. And if all these are in place, you'll find out that the incident, even though because it's a disaster, will not be full-blown. That is the advantages. Now, these advantages also will link up to the private sector, because by the time a private sector puts in place its own business continuity plan, he has done the risk assessment, he has done the business impact analysis, and then he has also looked at plugging the holes, and then he has a standing emergency response teams in place. The public sector will learn from the private sector. How do you do this? Because essentially, most of the people that you see working in the public sector, I mean the agency, fire service, and the rest, they do not have that sequential knowledge of mitigating, preparing, or even responding to incidents. All they do, first of all, is to respond. So by the time they see that the private sector is actually playing a good role, it's going to affect the budgeting for the government, because the issue of disaster will reduce. That is one. Number two, it will also stem the tide of criminal tendencies, because within your own environment, let us say you have the risk of terrorism and the rest. Well, I put in place some cameras and so on. So when the private sector, when the public sector comes in and says, "Can we do it occurs here? Do you have a CCTV?" Yes, we have. Then crimes, issues will be solved at a more faster rate. So I would say that the private sector is really the way to go. If the private sector is prepared and they are linked together through their preparation, the public sector has very limited, their job is cut into half. That's my submission. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you very much, Mr. Phillips. Of course, I also agree with you that private sector participation in disaster risk reduction and overall response is very important to ensuring that one, we minimize the impact of disasters, but as well as drawing the resources from the private sector to ensure we build that resilience from the national level to the local level. Thank you very much. And then going back to you again, Marilyn, I'll want to, because of course, if you looked at the level of work that the GNDR is doing within the Africa region, specifically in the Gambia where I live, I've seen a lot of efforts being done by GNDR. For example, the views from the front line is one of those examples that I've seen that the GNDR are taking forward at the local level. So could you tell us what significance these actions have had on the lives of the local population?
I'm sorry, Bubaka, I didn't hear your last question. I think, I don't know if it's, pardon?
Okay, so let me repeat again. Yeah, so given the fact that GNDR is doing a lot of grassroots interventions, the views from the front line is one of those local initiatives that I mean, like a global initiative, but of course happening at the local level. So I want to ask, could you tell us, what impact has some of these projects, example like the views from the front line, there could be others, have had on the lives of this local population?
Thank you so much. So I think like one of the things that we have seen just based on some of the examples that I've given previously is that we have been able to like document, I think, quite a bit of evidence on what some of the gaps are. But then when we're looking at possible solutions, I think some of them, like one of the key things is that collaboration is actually big and is part of the solution. Without collaborating with like the different stakeholders, that's the only way we can be able to ensure that we're able to come about and have a sustainable process that that is long-lasting. And then the other, I think, example I would say is that we need to ensure that we actually empower the local actors in response, in recovery, preparedness, and prevention activities. Like just like what I had mentioned before, like one of the gaps has been that the communities are never included during the planning process, and this is with the different stakeholders. So we need to ensure that we empower the local actors. And once we empower the local actors, what we have seen as evidence, and I can give quite a bit of evidence that, like, for example, we have a community in Tanzania whereby they have been able to actually set up like an SMS system, because like they have taken that ownership and they and just through that basic SMS process, like they have been able to inform like each other whenever there's something that is about to happen. I also have other examples whereby like in the Philippines, we have seen that just by empowering the community, they have been able to lobby and advocate with the local government. And through this process, we have seen that the local government now ensures that whenever they're coming up with plans, actions, like they have involved the community. The other, I think, evidence I could give is that there's need to build coherence into the governance structure and the risk assessments. And I think this Dr. Ahmed had also measured. We find that a lot of the times with these global frameworks, it's like they're working in silos, but then a lot of these issues transcend like the different frameworks. So we need to ensure that there's coherence, whether it's with the Sendai framework, DRR process, whether it is the SDGs, whether it is the Paris Agreement. How can we ensure that there is coherence that is inbuilt into the governance structures? We also need to ensure that the disaster risk considerations are integrated across other sectors. So like we don't look at it as a standalone, because DRR affects all areas and all aspects of our lives. So I think, like, just to conclude, I would say is that we need to ensure we do DRR. We need to ensure that all process incorporates risk-informed development, whether it's at the initial phase, and then also ensure that DRR has been integrated across and into all other sectors. So maybe I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. Of course, it's important to ensure that it's collaboration with other stakeholders, and then empowerment for the local communities to be able to prepare, respond, and recover from the impacts of disasters, but as well as ensuring that there is greater coherence in terms of, ensuring we have an integrated approach to disaster risk reduction that is embedding it within the governance structures, but also ensuring that, local population themselves are able to participate. So for me, this is the true meaning of localization. And I believe GNDR is one of those champions that are, taking the front line to ensure the local population are equipped with the requisite knowledge and skills to be able to champion their own disaster risk reduction and response efforts. Thank you very much, Marilyn. So moving to Dr. Ahmed. Of course, Dr. Ahmed coming from the from a regional bloc from the Eastern and Southern Africa. I believe the regional blocs have a greater role to play in terms of, ensuring member states are able to integrate, as alluded to by Marilyn, within their governance structures, disaster risk reduction and response strategies, and ensuring that these strategies are incoherent with the global frameworks, as you have mentioned in your previous intervention. So could you tell us how best this would, what role could the regional bloc play in this regard?
Thank you, Babakar, again. Yes, I'm sorry, I don't have the camera. But in general, Babakar, the regional blocs like IGAD plays a policy role. First of all, for example, we have been supporting our member states to have a disaster risk management strategy or policy. If they do have, we make sure that it's aligned to the Sendai priorities and targets. Why this is important, Abakar, is that if we don't align our strategies and our programmatic areas, then we cannot be sure of the outcomes. Of course, contextualizing to the national strategies, the national priorities is always there. But it has to be aligned to the global platforms or global frameworks, rather. This is quite essential. So IGAD has, for example, assisted South Sudan, Somalia, and Sudan to have their revised and aligned DRM strategy in 2018 for Sudan, 19 for South Sudan, and much recently in 2020 for Somalia. So now their strategies are there and aligned, ready for implementation. What, as we move forward, having a strategy is one important thing, but implementation is the other issue. So that is now where we are heading. Starting maybe this year, we are trying to roll out the regional strategy as well as supporting the countries to be able to implement what is in their respective strategies. So that is how we have been working with them. One last point, Abubakar, which I would like to add is DRM or DRR as a cross-cutting discipline is also important for us to mainstream this agenda across the different sectors, whether it's education or agriculture or other sector. It has to be risk informed. It has to be risk proof, as we call it. So that element is also very essential. So once you support countries to have the strategy aligned with the global frameworks, then we have to again move beyond that and implement. Okay, and we don't stop there. We have to also mainstream it to other sectors, as DRM is a cross-sectoral and a cross-agency activity. Over to you, Abubakar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. I'm quite amazed with the level of work that the regional blocs are putting forward to ensuring that member states are able to develop their own strategies and as well are able to respond as effectively as possible to disaster events, not only to disaster events, but of course, contributing to ensuring that, the risks are reduced to a substantial level. So because we are running against time, so I'm going to quickly go to the private sector and then to Dr. Fanika from one of the member states within the ECOWAS region. So Mr. Phillips, in 1 minute, can you tell us what resources or what sort of commitments that the private sector needs to take to ensure that countries are able to have their disaster risk reduction strategies, but as well are able to respond as effectively as possible to these disasters by leaving no one behind?
Okay. One thing that is important, or two things. Number one, there should be a law that mandates the private sector to put in place what we call the, I'm going to call it a business continuity plan. Because a business continuity plan encompasses that risk assessment, the ability to know what can affect you at a given time, and your processes. If your processes is down, it could become a disaster that will become a public health or public issues that will become a government problem ultimately. Number two is that to those that are in the public sector, especially the regulatory authorities, they need to understand what is business continuity, what is the requirement from the private sector, because the private sector are somehow intelligent. Because if you tell them to do this, they can go to the internet and then download and then present something for you. And then because you do not already understand what they are presenting to you, you let them go. But if the regulatory authorities within a country or within its sectors of the economy understand what is required from the private sector, and then they say, let us have your plan for disaster, let us have your plan for risk assessment. They'll be able to go through those plans and link them up, because for the business continuity, it's not just one plan. You have about 7 outputs. You have the risk assessment, you have the business plan, you have your emergency response plan. You also have the crisis communication, crisis management and crisis communication plan. Are you getting me now? So all these things must link together. So if they link together, you will find out that the resilience of the nation will be great. Instead of the public sector respond or leaning on the private leaning on the public sector, you will find that things will work well. Then I want to say something. Disaster is better managed bottom up, not top down, because that is what we see mostly in African countries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Phillips. Of course, I agree that disasters are better managed using the bottom-up approach, and as well ensuring that we have a business continuity plan. So in the interest of time, I'll quickly jump to Dr. Fanika Dembele, who is from a member state in Mali. Dr. Fanika, can you quickly tell us in Mali, how is the government prioritizing disaster risk reduction and response into its national strategy? Dr. Fanika, are you with us? Dr. Fanika? Okay, I think we might lost Dr. Fanika there, but because we don't have time, so I'm just going to quickly say thank you to all of you for your intervention and for your response to the questions. I definitely believe that the audience out there would have learned a lot from this session. And then thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers. And then thank you to all of you, the beautiful audience out there. Thank you, panelists, Marilyn, Dr. Ahmed, Mr. Phillips, and of course, Dr. Fanika Dembele. Thank you. It's a pleasure catching up with all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye, and have a nice day.
Thank you.